We have witnessed many antitrust regulations in the past. Microsoft, Google, and very recently, General Electric being subjected to these regulations. However, we have not heard a lot about them in the new era of digital markets. The unit economics of digital markets is such that only consolidation is the answer. It is a pure volume game. These giants strive to capture a large market share. Let's cut across and hear from Professor Viswanath Pingali his thoughts on whether antitrust regulations are here to stay or not in the new era of digital markets.
So, digital markets. If I were to think about one risk that the firms that are supposed to be digital are ignoring in their decision making, I would actually argue that it is the antitrust risk. We've written a few things about it in the national newspapers, but my whole argument is if you look at the cases that are going on against pretty much any platform, take it Google, take it as Amazon, Facebook, Apple, any platform that you could think of nowadays, it is actually in the midst of an antitrust litigation, and somehow or the other, as we see the firms starting up, we do not see that antitrust risk being priced in. Let me tell you why the antitrust risk actually emerges, and what are some of the confusions that I'm noticing, both in terms of how the firms act, as well as to how the regulators are acting. So let me see if I can articulate the top 3 confusions that I actually see in the market out there. Traditionally, when in late 1800s, when people were thinking about antitrust laws, their entire argument was that sometimes the firms could take certain actions which would compromise the competition that the firms would face in the market. And therefore, certain restrictions have been placed on how the firms are supposedly behaving. One of the things that emerged, it's not necessarily completely right, but one of the things that has emerged is that size is a massive issue. If you're really big, then there's always a chance that you might be doing something that is not supposedly right? So let's actually consider working with the understanding of digital markets. Can we actually, and so the first question that I'd like to pose here would be, can we actually say that the big size necessarily means that the firm is in a dominant position? In other words, can market power and market share be conflated with each other? Now, that's a massive question. The whole argument is, even if the platform is flourishing in every sense of the word, you actually see that there's a competition not only from other platforms that you're talking about, but also from the competition that you actually see from the offline services. Let me give you an example. One of the fundamental arguments, before we go any further with digital markets, one of the fundamental arguments that we need to understand is this argument called network effects. What are network effects? Economists think about network effects in 2 different ways. First one is what we call as direct, another one is what we call as indirect. What's a network effect? What's a direct network effect? I'm on Facebook because my friends are on Facebook, and my friends are on Facebook because their friends are on Facebook, and so on and so forth. Their friends using Facebook is important to them. They derive greater utility out of Facebook, so therefore they join the bandwagon. This is basically what is called as a direct network effect. Let's think about something like an Amazon. More buyers are there, that attracts more sellers to the platform. The more number of sellers there are in the market, the more number of buyers there are in the market. It becomes a virtuous cycle in every sense of the word. So therefore, now if I were to apply the traditional antitrust laws, you see the confusion that is coming out there. These markets, thanks to the presence of network effects, will end up becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, right, in terms of size. But will that necessarily mean that firms have developed a lot of market power? The question is nebulous, right? Take the case of Uber. Uber enjoys a lot of network effects, for instance. We do see that there are other platforms. I mean, every country that Uber is in, it is competing with fellow competitors. For example, in India, it competes with Ola. In the East Asian markets, it competes with Grab. So many places, China, Didi, every place has its own set of competitors. At the same time, it competes with the informal markets that you actually see, the informal network of drivers that always exist in the Indian market. So therefore, can a platform run away with pricing structures just because it happens to have significant market power? The answer would be, it's an empirical question. There's no theoretical ready-made answer. So the second confusion that I actually see in the antitrust markets that I see is this concept called bundling. I combine one or two products. One of my products is a major product. On top of it, I actually combine it with other products and try to make those products, at least the allegations that you see in the market out there is that the other products also will be pushed into the market on the back of my major product. Make sense? So here is where I would say there is a confusion. Sometimes why do I innovate? Sometimes why do I bring in these add-on products? I talked about network effects. The faster I build up network effects, the greater it is for me. At the same time, a competitor can copy my strategy, come up with a slightly better strategy, and therefore steal the entire market that I actually have because they have better network effects, or maybe they have better services. Here in this particular case, I want to stay one step ahead of my competition. Therefore, I innovate and I provide additional features to my core product to make my core product more exciting for the user. Thereby, it may look as if I'm promoting the other products, but I'm actually promoting my core product. So this is a massive confusion that I believe the authorities are also kind of in some cases missing. In the sense that, when I look at peripheral products that are coming into the market, do I call them as products which are meant at abuse of dominance, pushing these products into the market at the expense of the existing products, or do I actually look at it as consolidation of my core product itself? So I do believe that for many cases, if you look at the cases that are involving almost every platform today, this abuse of dominance, this bundling thing, which is being looked at as abuse of dominance, is kind of predominant. Once again, I would argue that there's no silver bullet out there which will tell you this is bundling, this is abuse of dominance, and that's promotion of core strategy. That's an empirical question. I think the onus therefore lies on whether you're promoting the core products because of reason X or reason Y. I don't think there is any theoretical confusion, theoretical answer to it. The third confusion that I'll actually say, if you look at the time when I was young, the arguments that, the economies of scale is a term that I remember being misused left, right and center. The only way you grow is grow big and it will take care of itself. People didn't have a clue about economies of scale, but everyone talked about it. Later, slowly, surely, digitization is the word that has taken over. Everyone talks about digitization.com. That too passed. Then people talked about variety of things like, digital transformation and funny things. If you look at the modern day buzzwords, according to me, the biggest buzzword that is kind of perpetrating right now, and again, I do believe that people have very little knowledge of what it is network effects. Many of the arguments that you see around me keep talking about how network effects are these be all and end all, the massive entry barriers, this, that. I'd actually like to argue that, network effects, the biggest fallacy in this entire thing is to assume that network effects are this entity which are uniform in nature. They are not actually. We've already distinguished between direct and indirect network effects. We also have talked about, so therefore, where is the confusion as far as network effects are concerned? I actually would like to distinguish. I'm quoting from a recent Harvard Business Review paper. We have to also distinguish between what we call as global network effects and local network effects. Network effects that are limited to a particular region versus network effects that are that are there for huge geographical spread. For example, let's just say that you're talking about Uber or Ola or any of these transportation. These network effects are most often than not limited within a particular city. Correct? There are other, platforms, for instance. There are other platforms, Airbnb, for instance. The network effects are spreading not in the city that you actually live. You'll never use Airbnb in the city that you're living. You'll actually use Airbnb for the cities that you'll be visiting. And so therefore, the network effects actually are more global in nature. Where is entry easy? Imagine you only have local network effects. In that particular case, you'd actually see that the competitor would find The niche markets where you are weaker, make an entry there and from there take off. Whereas in the cases where you actually see global network effects, agreed, penetration becomes a little difficult in every sense of the word. So therefore, this is, I think, the biggest confusion that I actually see, network effects being called uniform. So far we've talked about several confusions that we've seen emerging with the emergence of digital markets. What can we do about it? What can policymakers do about it? What can firms do about it? So let me talk a little bit in terms of what my top 3 recommendations would be. The first one that I would actually argue would be that you have to look at local data, local evidence. There's no uniform rule. Let me give you an example. This is based out of an article I wrote with a friend called Danny Sokol in Forbes India recently. Correct? Let me ask you a very weird looking question. The question will look weird, but nonetheless, that's how we write the article. What is one thing that you see common between India and Taiwan? Taiwan has no clue about cricket. India has no clue about baseball. Probably if you put NCR region together, it would have probably already outstripped Taiwanese population by a long stretch. But yet, these two countries are the top 2 countries in terms of number of apps used by a typical cell phone user. Now, imagine this. If a set of apps were to come pre-installed in a cell phone with the operating system, these two countries, I mean, at least the Taiwanese Fair Trade Commission has recognized this fact and said that it's not an antitrust violation at all. It's not an abuse of dominance at all, because people are really not going to take the apps that come pre-installed seriously at all. Do we know anything about the Indian market? When we see decision making happening in the Indian regulatory space, do we see some India-centric data? Do we see some India-centric research that's coming out to determine whether this pre-installation of apps with your operating system is abuse of dominance or not? I mean, there is no general rule which says that the European precedents and the American precedents are indeed the right precedences to follow in this case. Local conditions, local analysis, probably something that I would actually strongly think is necessary. The second thing that the second thing that I would actually talk about here would be, here is where the firms also have an onus. I mean, it's not just the regulators that need to educate themselves on these laws. It is up to the firms to educate the regulators on the need for rethinking, in terms of these markets. How much of it is coming in terms of pure strategy? How much of it is coming in with a malicious intent, if you will? But it is up to the firms actually. And what's the solution out there? One of the things that I've noticed out there is that many Indian businesses are fairly reticent about publishing more about their business practices, understanding about their local, understanding about their, or develop an understanding about their business models in general. I think we need more case studies. I think we need more transparency on the part of firms to basically be able to say, hey, I've been, researchers have written, unbiased researchers have come out, in this particular case. So therefore, you got to kind of showcase the business models much more clearly in every sense of the word, according to me. That'll be my top recommendation. I think we should have more India-centric case studies that are coming out in the Indian market. And listen, I'm saying this with complete selfish intent, by the way. As an academic, I thrive on writing these cases and research. So therefore, the more number of people who watch this video come to me, the better it is for me. I will agree with you on that. But nonetheless, I think I'm very serious about the fact that there is a paucity of quality cases on the Indian markets out there. And I think it's a need of the hour that the regulators understand how these markets work. Third thing that I actually believe is that we need to see more research coming out, which is data-centric in nature, on the way the Indian customer is reacting to digital markets. I've already said this. In some sense, it dovetails quite nicely with the first point I made, which is that we need to study, we should rely on local evidence. But I'm actually arguing that, maybe there are deeper psychological, patterns that you'd actually see in the way the Indian consumer operates when compared to the Western ones. And I would actually argue that the platforms that are currently present in India right now should probably take a lead in understanding some of these very, 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 very clearly, actually. So in short, if you want my take on digital markets, I would say that this is an antitrust in digital markets. I would actually argue that this is a phenomenal space. The reason is that many of the traditional antitrust laws cases look slam dunk, but when you understand the economics behind, the unit economics behind how these digital markets work, for example, economists are fond of classifying everything as sunk cost and variable cost and fixed cost and all this stuff. I don't think that's how it works in the digital markets. You need to invent new types of costs out there for you to make any sense, right? I mean, so the argument there to me remains. I mean, there's a lot of confusion that needs to be solved, which way, this way or that way. And so therefore, academics like me who actually want to work on digital markets, competition in platform markets, and antitrust laws, we find this to be a fascinating area. And I do hope that you who are listening to it would find it fascinating enough, and can I even add scary enough, that you'd actually start looking for solutions in this particular case. Thank you very much.